it's clear from throughout your book that Dickens was a highly sensitive writer to how he was perceived, and he was very aware of how he was presenting himself. And there are many manifestations of that in print and towards the end of his life in public appearances and his trips to America and so on. He is fashioning his life for consumption, and that's something which the biographer has got to contend with, I suppose.
Yes. But, with Dickens a great deal, what you saw was what you got. I mean, he was a phenomenal man who was extraordinarily kind and compassionate. It wasn't just an act, as it were. He was extraordinarily efficient, extraordinarily energetic. All these things were part of his public image, but they were also true of him. I think it's very hard to think, that question of what are they like at home. I mean, Dickens was very much the same at home as he appeared in public. Perhaps a bit harsher sometimes. I mean, if disagreed with somebody or felt some friend had not behaved well towards him, he could be pretty harsh, certainly. But I don't think the public image that Dickens presented, the split only really began to happen, I think, in the 1840s. And still more in the 1850s, when the appearance of being the absolute model of a happy family man, a happy father, the great sort of celebrator of hearth and home, which is how the public perceived him, didn't accord with his increasing dissatisfaction in his marriage.
What was striking about that was the tenacity with which he kept that up. The fact that even in his will, he's only got very cold words for his wife. And at one point, before he goes on his second trip to America, she sends him quite a warm message of good wishes, and his answer is very, very cold. Yeah. That was something that I puzzled over, because it did, as you say, seem to be at odds with so much of the life. The fact that was he kept that up for so long. I mean, why do you think that was?
Well, what he did, what he said he did, he wrote her out of his life. I mean, that's why I call that chapter Writing Off a Marriage. It was most extraordinary thing, as though she just really hadn't existed. And on two occasions when she did write to him after the separation, as you say, he returns very, very brief, cold notes to his great friend and Catherine Dickens's great friend, Angela Burdett Coutts. When she's trying to reconcile them, he says it's just no good. There was a page of my life that had writing on it that is now completely blank, and it's not in my power to put writing on again. Very, very chilling words. I mean, he felt that Catherine had, I think first of all he felt that she'd failed him, that she somehow had not been able to supply the support, the comfort, the inspiration, the sexual comfort or whatever, that he wanted from his wife. And then at a certain point in the separation, I think when he met and obviously fell in love with Ellen Ternan, who was 20, I think, 19 or 20, about the same age as his younger daughter anyway. That was the kind of catalyst, and then it was just intolerable, the marriage. But first of all, he was sort of feeling sorry for poor Catherine. She's never been up to it. She doesn't understand me. He really did say, she doesn't understand me. She kind of gropes around, trying to, but it's all very sad, and poor old thing, she'd be much happier away. And then at some point during the negotiations for the separation, Catherine does or says something, or is reported as saying something, which enrages him so much that she becomes an enemy, and he doesn't want anything more to do with her, and he rejects her utterly and completely.
Yeah, there's one moment where he gets up at 2 a.m. after an argument and walks for 30 miles from London to Kent, which I suppose is indicative of both of his energy and the strength of his feeling.
Yes. Well, it could well have been her saying, "What's all this about Ellen Ternan then?" First of all, I'm sure Dickens perhaps convinced himself that, as he said in that amazing statement that he published in 1858, that this young lady whose name was being bandied about was as innocent and good and pure as his own dear daughters, and that he really thought of himself as having a very pure relationship with Ellen, and was outraged when perhaps Catherine very understandably suggested that he might have more than a fatherly interest in the girl. But we don't know what caused that, or even if it was a quarrel with Catherine that caused him to get up and walk those 30 miles. But certainly after that, he didn't stay under the marital roof very much.
I knew about Dickens' readings, public readings, of course, before I read your book, but I hadn't realised to what extent he was involved in the theatre and that he considered being an actor early in his career. And really that theatrical thread runs all the way through his life. From going to see Grimaldi as a boy, there's a sort of theatrical strand which is very pronounced.
Oh yes, I mean even earlier than that, when he was very young, and his father would, as it were, exhibit him and his little sister standing on a table in the pub, the Mitre in Chatham, and singing comic duets and so forth. And he was a performer, from a very, very early age. And yes, it goes all the way through. I think that Dickens had this extraordinary experience that I can't imagine another artist quite has it. He writes all these works that people love, and then he performs them, physically there in front of the audience so they can adore him. An actor, of course, is applauded and adored, but the actor hasn't usually written the script as well. And so Dickens became, as Carlyle said to him, you carry a whole theatre under your hat. And he did really. He was the manager, the director, the producer, the author, and the sole actor. So it was a consummation of, it was more than just being a brilliant actor, because he clearly was a superb actor. And when he acted for charity in Shakespeare and Ben Jonson and so forth, the theatre critics praised him to the skies. But then acting his own texts, which were already, people were adored. People would bring little copies of the Christmas Carol or whatever to his readings and kind of follow him while he was acting it. And when he introduced new bits, it would be a tremendous thrill, I suppose at the heart of it all is acting, because there's a wonderful book by Robert Garris called The Dickens Theatre, published back in the 1970s, I think, but which was one of the first to really explore that aspect of Dickens's prose, as it were, the performative act. He's acting in his letters too. This is why their letters are in some ways very frustrating for a biographer, because they're endlessly quotable, because Dickens is always striking attitudes either of despair or telling some wonderful comic anecdote, but and they're written for that recipient. They are performances, his letters. They're an aspect of performative art. And so, of course, is his writing. He says in a speech that everybody who writes in effect for the stage. Well, that's not something that Henry James would have agreed with, but it's very telling, I think, that Dickens makes that connection. And he does have, obviously very great scenes in his novels that could be just staged, and the great characters and so on.